Hi, Marie.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. It looks like a Parisian cafe.
Exactly.
Minus the wine. So as a French
in
person,
Europe.
I like it, minus the wine. Yeah.
There's going to be wine later at around 4 p.m., by the way. So thank you, everyone. So I hope you don't mind if I share this. The first time we met at a conference. Or actually, I think that was the second time we met. But we met at a conference, and at a certain point during the day, we sat by this fire pit, and we sort of looked at each other and decided that we were going to start organizing some dinners under the slogan, "No crap, no egos."
Yes.
And the reason why is because we felt that not only do we want that as humans to cut through the BS and have a real conversation about where the industry is headed, but we thought the industry needed it too. And so one of the things that I admire most about you is that you're my partner in that, and I could have really frank and open conversations with you throughout our entire relationship. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it was also the occasion to say that not everything's working.
Right.
Not everything's perfect. Sometimes we fail.
Right.
And it's okay. So yeah.
So you've had.
So that's the next conference. The next conference
is
no crap, no ego / content. So,
yes,
yeah,
I like that.
Content.
Well, I think to some extent we should do that here today because content is a really difficult, complex function. It's difficult to get it done right. You're kind of organizing and reorganizing around it. And one of the really hard things about it is the measurement piece that, you know, as opposed to a binary measurement like display advertising, content is just this multivariate formula for success. You spent a big chunk of your career at L'Oreal, and now you moved to this incredible, iconic brand, Calvin Klein. How have you thought about creating content and measuring content and really organizing that function inside of both of these orgs?
So look, I've only worked for legacy brands and some more recent brands and new brands, but every time you're in charge of a big iconic brand, first of all you have the legacy in your hands. So I wish I was one of these people thinking, well, I need to have a big idea. I think all the big ideas are in my brand DNA. So my job and the job of my team is to really find what's on DNA and adapt it to the new world and new channels with much more fragmentation and options for consumers. They don't need a new pair of jeans. So we need to find ways to make them feel at their best and connect with the brand. So I would say the first thing I do is I focus on the DNA. Sometimes I ask myself, what would Calvin Klein, Mr. Calvin Klein, do? The thing
and
is,
what's the answer?
He was doing things with billboards and print ads. So I'm asking myself, what would he do on Instagram? And I hope we found some answers. Our engagement has been pretty good, and not everything, going back to no crap, no ego, and things that are not working. Not everything is not working. Some things are working quite well. So I asked myself, what would he do? And I asked myself, what should we change? I think diversity, for instance, body sizes have changed a lot in the way we portray fashion. Fashion used to be, I think, it still is, very skinny in some instances. So these are the things I'm trying to change. And I try to respectfully challenge the legacy of Mr. Calvin Klein doing so.
Well, I think it makes sense. I think probably the world has gone to a place where consumers are just demanding that brands are a lot more genuine in the way they represent themselves. So that makes sense. So when you think about storytelling, what does that really mean to Calvin Klein? And I think a separate question under that is, where does it sit on the axes between performance and brand? I'm sure you've gotten this question so many times, so you can give me the no BS answer.
So I love you on that, but that's not my favorite question.
I know,
so
sorry.
The first thing I did when I joined is that I stopped this crappy separation of brand and performance. I think it creates so many silos within companies. The brand people are going to fight for awareness and connection, and the performance teams are going to fight for ROI, when at the end of the day, it's supposed to work together. So I'm not saying it doesn't have, the separation doesn't have a purpose. You connect with a brand, but at the end of the day, you buy a product. So that's where it comes from. But in reality, it's creating more, I would say, frictions and tensions than it should. So I'm usually summarizing the job to be done in 4 jobs. So 1, you need to acquire. You acquire consumers. 2, you need to then being able to bond with them in a way. So you connect, you bond, and then you have to convert, and then you have to retain consumers. And all this has to work together. So the budget shouldn't be separate. It should really help solve the full funnel. I would say when you do the brand versus performance opposition, you always forget the mid-funnel piece, the intent piece, the consideration piece. So I think that's also a big trap, sort of pitfall to avoid.
When you look around in your industry, do you see that happen a lot? Are marketers just lower funnel focused across the board?
Like we have to, because most of the time we report to CEOs and they are accountable on that, and we are accountable on the top line and the bottom line too. But at the end of the day, what I keep saying is that to get there, to get to higher revenues and sustainable EBIT growth, you have to manage the full funnel. So splitting the teams, I'm fortunate enough I was able to merge the teams. So we have 4 teams working together. I've merged marketing and comms, so it's MarCom. So it's everything consumer facing. Then I have a MarTech team. So it's media, consumer insights, data, DCO, content optimization. Should be in real time. We're not there yet. We'll get there. I have a team dedicated to the shopper experience. So retail and e-commerce, and we're trying to have the 2 teams work together. We can talk about retail. That's an interesting, fun topic. And I have a team that works on transformation and change management and upskilling.
So, a couple of questions to follow up that. How do you manage up and think about explaining or maybe instilling some of the patience in the leadership that is needed to really kind of allow for the full funnel approach? And then separately, how do you think about managing down and essentially upskilling across the board? I'm curious just to hear a bit more about what the change management team is doing.
So I would say that we try to upskill the entire organization. So now I'm doing it for the parent company, so for all the brands, so not only Calvin but also Tommy and all the brands of the corporation. So we're trying to do it for everybody. I would say for the younger teams, it's about teaching and explaining and maybe getting the product piece or the non-expert piece. And for senior leaders, it's really about understanding the new world. So I have a few techniques to upskill CEOs.
Share all your secrets. I'm sure everyone wants to hear them.
So one of them is to get them out of the office so they can see what other industries are facing and how this new world works. Another one is, marketing of fear, I don't know, explaining that a lot of CEOs failed because they didn't understand this new world. I don't use it all the time,
so you're
but sometimes
instilling the
use
fear
it.
of failure. I like it.
I have to admit, I still use it when I'm out of arguments, rational arguments. You always use some emotional benefits in marketing and some rational benefits. I always peer them with younger rising talents in the organizations, and I try to expose them to thought leaders like yourself.
Thank you, Marie. That's very kind. I've seen you develop this team over the last year, and you've brought in so many incredible leaders. How have you thought about recruiting the best talent out there?
So by the way, I'm still hiring. So if you want to apply, you can LinkedIn me or tweet. So you know what's interesting is that I think that the best marketers used to be considered this kind of big idea, creative geniuses or creative people, and I like that I was able to have on the team the geniuses in data and the geniuses in creative, and they don't fight. Sometimes they don't agree, but they work together. So the mantra of the team is, in a world of fashion where intuition is king, we want to power our ideas with the best data and knowledge and facts.
I like that. So taking a step back, I know that you're also passionate about thinking about kind of how do you internalize the strategic functions of the marketing org, and what makes sense to internalize versus to do with partners. And this is also the eternal questions that CMOs get, but I'm curious, and maybe you hate me for asking you these questions. I prefer that question
to the...
You prefer it? Okay.
Yeah, to the
well, no, but the reason I asked the first one is because I wanted you to say the answer. I'm leading the... So tell us a bit about how do you think of, what are the most strategic functions that you want to bring internally, and where do you rely on partners?
So first of all, for the agencies in the room, we in-housed a lot of the functions, not because we don't want to work with agencies. I had the most fantastic relationships with some agency leaders and teams over the past. So it was not about that. I think the first intent, and we might go back to agencies, but the first intent was to be hands-on keyboard, and being able to place a piece of content and measure the effect, the impact of the content. Should it be connection, intent, or conversion? So doing that, you don't hand over a creative and saying, please buy and plan media like you used to. I think the teams need to be super close to this feedback loop. Also because we have our stores, we have a lot of stores, we have our direct e-commerce, but we still have a lot of retailers partners. So especially when you have this big wholesale part of your business, if you're not close to consumers, I don't think you build competitive advantages for the future. I keep saying that you'll have, maybe in 10 years from now, you'll have two types of companies, maybe it's already the case. Companies that are in direct contact with their consumers and companies who are not. And I don't want to be in the second camp. I want to be in the first league. So that's the first idea was really to be hands-on keyboard. Then the second intention was to have the creative teams and the data teams work together. So it's really, in China, I think they do it super well. They have content teams and data teams and media teams, and it's this kind of constant feedback loop and teams working together like that. And then I would say that we continue to partner with great third-party strategic people. So I think that we used to look for activation, a lot of activation partnerships, and now I'm looking for thought leadership, change management, data. So I think what we're shopping for has changed.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to throw another question at you that you might hate me for. So this is a topic that I think there's a lot of buzzwords around, probably a lot of BS in the industry. It's called influencer marketing. You have a history as a brand of using influencers, right? From Marky Mark to the Kardashians. The latest one I think was Shawn Mendes.
I didn't do the Kardashian campaign.
No, I know.
It was prior to.
I know. That noted. Okay, everyone should know that. So then tell us about your influencers and what you're proud of.
I wish I had done the Marky Mark and Kate Moss.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a good one. Did you guys launch both of them? Or were they big back then?
No, I think they were not. I think it's Mr. Calvin Klein reading a magazine and seeing Marky Mark, and his name was Marky Mark at the time, wearing really? Underwear. No, but he's Mark Wahlberg and he was Marky Mark. So
right.
I think he realized that the power of the image of him wearing underwear. So that's the start of the campaign.
Mm. So
I'll get to your influencer question.
Yes. So how have you thought about using influencers since you've joined Calvin Klein? I know you've recently launched a campaign. It features a couple of influencers. Tell us a bit about that.
So it's a good segue with the Marky Mark story. I think the brand was really, and many brands have done that, to identify rising personalities you want to work with. So it's no different. So it's another thing that used to exist and has a different name. So we don't do silos between celebrities and influencers. We don't do that. We just want to work with great talents. I think what has changed is the volume, the scale. and being able to partner. It used to be a very manual, relationship-based thing, and now you have data, so you can scout so many new talents and many faces. And I'm happy that we can put on the spotlight talents that people don't know about. So that's one. And the second thing is, I think the BS detector of consumers is way higher. If you think about it, this Marky Mark campaign was shocking for most people to be on a billboard. I don't think it would shock anyone today. I'm not sure about that. So the question is, how do you remain authentic and on DNA, and especially when people can really see what's paid versus organic and all of that.
So on that note, actually, my follow-up question was going to be, how do you think about that mix between paid and owned? Because that's what you control. And then how do you best use earned and kind of the organic content that gets created as a result of some of your campaigns to essentially put it back on kind of the owned or the paid side?
So I'm going to have the same boring answer to your questions. I try, the teams are really working together and doing it together. So you post a piece of content. If it works well, you want to amplify it with media. That's what you want to do. So this hub of data and media and content working together is really what we're doing. Another thing I changed, when I started this job 18 months ago, people were asking me, so who's going to be your digital team? I couldn't find an answer. I said, I don't have a digital team. Everybody is, like, consumers don't see you saying, oh, that's a great digital ad. Nobody says that. So same way, I don't think consumers say, oh, this was a great piece of organic content. They can see, and now you have also regulation on top of that, but they can see advertising. So I try to have the teams, I try to remove the jargon. This kind of fake silos from ways of working. And I'm not saying we're 100% there. Don't think that, especially if you apply, you would be. We still have some things to solve. But yes, that's the intent.
I like how you're putting the consumer at the center of how you think about the terminology thing, that we often get away from that in the industry, and we talk in buzzwords a lot. So tell us a bit about hashtag mycalvins. How did it get started?
So it was Mr. Calvin Klein himself. I think he is a designer, but he was also an image maker. He was a great marketer. So so for those of you who remember, there was an ad with Brooke Shields, and she was talking about getting between me and mycalvins. So I didn't invent anything. I just reused the potential of this mycalvins idea. So we're fortunate. Sometimes you see ads with hashtags, and you're really thinking, who's going to use that hashtag at the end of the day? Like, it's another, I call it the office marketing stuff. Like, you have these great ideas in your office, but at the end of the day, consumers don't use it. So we're lucky because every 2 minutes or so, we have a consumer that is showing herself or himself in their Calvins. Personally, I don't do it. So I call it the undies. A sort of selfie in underwear. So when I arrived on the brand, I thought it was fascinating, and I thought it was much more than a hashtag. So now it's becoming our loyalty program. It's becoming customization of underwear. It's becoming an idea of a membership. Because again, it comes from what consumers are doing and how they interact with the brand.
Have you thought about making it more of a membership, just out of curiosity?
We're thinking about it, yeah.
It's a cool idea. I just came up with it. How do you think about...
I know you're not applying to join my team, but if you want...
Not yet, not
yet. Yeah, you have a great job.
We already work together, it's okay. So how does that work globally? Because Calvin Klein's a global brand, and as you know, you're from France, I'm from Transylvania. There's a lot of Americans here. The world is different in different places. How do you create a cohesive message across the board, or do you even try?
So I just hired someone from Adidas, and what he said when he joined, he said, oh, you're global. So I think that's really the sort of summary. So the brand has to be the same everywhere. It's the equity of the brand has to be global. So especially with global shoppers, when you're, for example, a Chinese global shopper, you want to see the same brand wherever you go. So the integrity of the brand has to be global. Then it's not my team in New York who's going to produce the Tmall content for the China team. So we have content hubs. We're trying to have content hubs in regions. And then I think it's very similar to your question around brand versus performance. If you're saying, oh, this is the global job and this is my swim lane, and hey, region, this is your swim lane, I don't think it's going to go very far. I think people are going to, it's going to conflict. If you say that the global team is in charge of the brand, but the regional teams are in charge of conversion, I think people are going to, you're going to have tensions very, very fast. So I'm trying to have a global leadership team with everybody at the table. So when the senior leaders meet, we have Brazil and Asia and Europe at the same table. I'm trying to do it most of the time. Doesn't mean that it's a perfect world, but we decentralize what needs to be decentralized. And it's not about power, it's not about territories, it's not about who owns what. It's really about getting the brand the closest to consumers.
Do you think that is a challenge that deals with being a fashion brand, or have you seen that be a challenge in the CPG realm? And what are some of the more specific challenges that deal with these two verticals?
It's a great question. I think these beauty and fashion brands organizations most of the time are very top-down and very vertical for the reasons I was talking about: the integrity of the brand, keeping the DNA at its best. But then you lose this direct connection with the consumers, and at the end of the day, data is going to be hyper-local. And the last mile of conversion retention is going to be hyper-local. Most functions have to have a global component and also have to be decentralized. And it's a stretch for these very vertically organized brands.
That makes sense. If you don't mind, I want to transition into the section of Marie gives life and career advice to the audience, because you've had an amazing career so far. I was talking to Kristen about the fact that she's been on the job for 6 years, and she said she was breaking the average CMO tenure. You've definitely,
which is less than 2 years, I think.
Which is less than 2 years. You've definitely broken the average CMO tenure at L'Oreal, and you're probably going to break it again and again in your career. How have you thought about being an effective, impactful marketer, and what has really led you from one stage of your career to another?
So best career advice I got was 15 years ago, and was about going to work every day as if it was your first day. And even when I was at L'Oréal, I had been there for a very long time. I was challenging myself every day. So that's one. The second thing, I don't think CMOs, we talked a lot about content and media and the job to be done for marketing organizations, but today it's also about partnering with the CIO, differently with the CFO. The financial norms have changed a lot. And if you want your measurement story to come across, you have no choice but partnering with the CFO. So I think the relationship with my peers, this is what probably makes the CMO tenure. It's not about the length; it's about the impact you get. It's really what is going to be the most interesting and impactful part of the job.
As you grew throughout your career, were you more of a person who would ask for permission or forgiveness?
Forgiveness. My former team is laughing on the front row. Yeah, I wish I was asking for permission more.
Is that true? Do you
It would get me out of trouble most of the time. But yes, And sometimes I ask for forgiveness, but most of the time, I care about the brand and I care about my team. That's what matters. That's what I do.
And then follow-up question, how do you feel when your team asks for permission versus forgiveness? What do you prefer?
I try to, sometimes I don't do a good job, but I try to empower and enable them. So it's really, maybe Kristen talked about it. I came at the end. She's really good at talking about servant leadership and this idea of what can I do for you instead of please do this. So yes, you when you report into a CEO, you have this high pressure on top line and bottom line. So you can have this urgency. I think Kristen talked about the urgency. You have the urgency of fixing things. But at the end of the day, it's really about, I think people come to work to do their best. So this old school management of checking if things are done, I think has to go. I was probably raised that way, and I tried to unlearn a lot of these to-do lists, kind of leadership way of doing things. And it's a lifelong journey. So I have another 20-something years to.
It's a really interesting
master
concept.
it.
Kristen, actually, towards the end, I asked her the same question that I'm about to ask you, because we have about a minute and a half left. It's really hard to get new things done in large companies. And as much as you want to do change management across the board and manage up and manage down and ask for forgiveness, at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, large organizations are sort of architected to kill ideas. I like to say to some of our customers, the best way to kill an idea is to put a lot of people on an email thread and ask them what they think. And so how do you think about getting new ideas through and disrupting people who are already overwhelmed? They're very busy. Do you have an innovation team? Do you think innovation is the job of everyone? How do you think about that?
So Kristen gave you the best answers. I was there when she answered. I would say 2 things. I would say it's a combination. Probably great books have been exist about this, how to rise ideas and make big ideas happen. The threads of emails are not a killer. So it has to be a seed, has to exist somewhere, and it has to prove value. That's kind of the basic. But then this is what I call the positive spiral. You have to make this success story known across the organization. Otherwise, it can die, even if it's a great beginning of something. So I would say the internal marketing, the internal storytelling about what's working, what are the beginning of strong proof points we see for any new thing. And then another thing, like the digital team, everybody on the job has a innovation or passion, an extra passion project if they want to. I'm trying to do that. So there is an innovation part of the media team, there is an innovation part of the content and creative team.
And it's a different set of people, or is it like 20% of your time has to be?
It's more the sort of 70-20-10, so it's the 10%. So 70 is your core, and 20 is the new things, and 10 is the kind of bizarre, out of the box thing.
And do people actually do it?
It's never a perfect thing, but if at the end of the day you get 3 new, used to be bizarre, but it's now very impactful things done, that's great. And even if it fails, you'll learn something.
I like that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marie,
Thank
for
you,
chatting.
Amanda. Thank you.